One thing I've always wondered in my entire life is why human intelligence is often described devoid of human emotion, nature, and otherwise desire. I think in theory and as well as in practice, it is quite easy to practice logical and otherwise more technical ways of intelligence outside of human nature. And I think we see this explicitly in the ways in which the STEM field has executed its level of efficiency. And its definition of efficiency is basically how can we make, number one, an act more accessible to a human being despite all of its god-given functions. How can we make it to fly, for example? And then number two, how can we make it safe for us to fly? Number three, how can we make it efficient for us to fly? And number four, how can we further make it more convenient to fly? I think these are four factors that factor into the marker of logic and otherwise human intelligence as a whole. And I mainly bring up this topic because I have been researching a lot on the nature versus nurture conversations and how it contributes to my perspective on how it basically integrates itself in the ways in which we um, interact with any form of intellectual media or information, and otherwise anti-intellectualism as an underhand for that as well. And for me, it's like one of those things whereby I've always like wondered, like, why is the STEM field always valued more than other fields? And I, through my years of not only being educated in the STEM field myself, but also having a deep love for the humanities, I never understood the disregard of the knowledge of one over the other. It never really made sense to me up until I did my own research into the human um relationship, well, basically humanity's relationship with logic and otherwise the ability to intellectualize a certain level of thought. And it's easier to do that in more technical spaces since we are not really gushing over like our natural being and our natural selves. We're more so trying to figure out ways to expand further than that, while focusing more on the external rather than the internal. And the internal, it requires us to be accountable of our carnal desires, our primal tendencies, as well as the ways in which we engage with each other that honestly predate any form of scientific thought, if I'm going to be honest. So, a lot of the ways in which I think anti intellectualism shows up is through this topic that I'm highlighting here, the nature versus nurture conversation, and otherwise the relationship that humanity has with the idea of logic. And I think money has to do with it because it's easier to scale for the most part the efficiency of, let's say, some sort of innovation when it is something that is more mechanical and automated, as well as it's able to sort of have a readable scale as to how efficient it is. We can't really scale for sure, we can't really guarantee for sure that a certain social way of thinking or being will be efficient or helpful without there being some form of dire consequences for another pastime. So like, let the way I'm wording this is that like it's harder for you to know if you have a good president or political leader unless like you see him actually in power. Because like it's one thing, to say all the right words and to get all the votes, but like once you're actually in that chair, like how can we predict that you're actually gonna be who you say you're gonna be? So I think because of the ways in which like the humanities, as well as just anything that focuses more on the human side of things, gets disregarded, is mainly because of the ways in which efficiency is vastly different from the more technical side of things and otherwise the more scientific side of things. And that's just how I look at it for the most part. And I think as okay, I'm mainly saying this as my testimony as someone who did a STEM course for an extended period of time, especially when I was a very young girl. Um, the ways in which STEM people operate in the world, it is quite obvious that they are mainly doing it because they have no regard for humanity as a whole. And I think the quickest way to sort of decipher that is the inventions and otherwise the things that they like to develop. Okay. For example, you will see a very smart, very technical person. They get a degree in, let's say, engineering, right? And then that person who gets a degree in engineering never really cared for the humanities and never really tried to understand human nature and otherwise human desire. So it will show up in the things that they try to make. And for them, so long as it's efficient, that's all that matters. So they end up making something that, in the grand scheme of things, people don't want it. I see it time and time again. I'll see a young, up and coming, like, STEM major come up, and you'll assume that, like, oh, they're gonna make some big changes in the world because of like how they're able to understand all these like very technical and information heavy concepts really quickly, and they're able to apply it with so much ease. So when you actually see them in the actual field and they end up making something that, in the grand scheme of things, like how did you even come up with that idea? Like, I'm not an inventor, at least not in the ways in which STEM finds valuable. How did you come up with this and think that this was going to be useful? Because it's one thing to make something, but you need to be able to be honest, like, just because it's efficient and like it's more convenient, that doesn't mean that it's needed. It's like when you put a random handle everywhere. Like, yes, in theory it's more convenient, but like in practice it's not needed. People would rather just lean on the wall if that were the case, because it's just not needed, you know. And I think that's like one of the ways in which like completely separating these two lines of thinking gets really murky and weird and kind of odd, because obviously I have issues with the way the humanities is handled as well, and I'll get back onto it. But the way STEM executes its ideas of like intelligence and thought and otherwise contributing to society, it is so devoid of any humanity at all. And I can't help but think, like, not only did you think that that was convenient, you thought this was going to make you money. You genuinely thought this was going to make you money. Because I'd understand making something, that, it's not all the way there when it comes to ethics, but like, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's quite efficient. But you made something that was not only like really not needed, but you made it in a ways in which that it won't even make you money. Like, people don't even want to buy it. So like, you know this is just one of the ways in which, like, I think completely like separating these lines of thinking and this line of thought, and instead of just like finding a little middle ground, like, can we make a Venn diagram, and then there's like a little intersection and whatnot, so that like we're able to at least create environments whereby we have innovations that actually contribute to society, and that we don't have to constantly like look back and say, who let this in here, who made this and thought this was okay. Like, that happening, I'm not saying it's like completely preventable, but it can be mitigated, I believe, if we did more stuff like that. And that's why I think integrating STEM, wait, no, changing STEM from STEAM. Ooh, did I pronounce that right? Changing STEM from STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. Mm-hmm. Once we have that abbreviation and we integrate more of the humanities into it, that makes it more, it locks into a lot of people's minds a bit more easier that like the humanities is a very integral part in the evolution of technology. That is just the nature of it. Okay, if you are just making things just for the sake of making things, and you're just like, oh, but it's efficient though, and it's like, yeah, but like, is it needed? Because like, it's one thing if like you say, oh, it's convenient. Conveniency in theory and in practice are two different things, and you can only really understand those realities if you don't understand, if you understand humans, if you understand human nature, right? Why would I need a handle on the wall when I can just lean my back into it? Why would I need to do that? These are the things that, you know, I think happens a lot in the world. And I think that is contributing to the anti-intellectualism conversation. So yeah, that's my contribution to the human, conversation. Yeah, nature versus nurture, and otherwise how it is related to anti-intellectualism. And yeah, I don't know if it will be referenced in my Substack, but hopefully, you got some food for thought, or at least are willing to give me some perspective in the comments. Thank you.